Welcome to the Backfire Coliseum. These are today's gladiators. 9 very premium, high quality, first focal plane scopes for hunting about in the 3 to 18 zoom range. Now, if you're saving up to buy an optic in this kind of category, you want it to be bomb-proof. You want to be able to go out in rain, sleet, and weather and have no worries about water. You want it to be drop-proof, tough, and you want it to track perfectly, so we have some lab equipment to make sure they're tracking absolutely how they want. We're gonna test sharpness, low light performance, everything in this. But first, who wants a scope that can't stand a little rain? Let's find out. With the old pool test, they all advertise that they're waterproof, and so they better be waterproof. 2 of our gladiators have fallen after the pool test. Initially, when I looked through all the scopes after, they all seemed like they were fine, but given a few hours to, I guess, let the humidity build up in there, 2 scopes have died, and they're 2 of my favorites in the test. First is this Hawk scope. It did get water inside it. It's gone. And, oh, the Burris Veracity pH with the cool electronics that we'll talk about later, it has died in the water intrusion. This test is brutal. It's way more than you're ever going to see on a hunt, but with so many scopes to choose from in this range, you might as well pick one that's going to be absolutely bomb-proof. I don't know that I would say I would never pick those because I really like especially that Burris Veracity pH, but again, we're doing this to find the very best. We're going to do 3 different tests on these scopes using some lab-grade materials to get a very precise reading on how well the scopes can track. So when I dial to 1 MOA, 2 mils, whatever each scope is, that we're getting an absolutely precise reading every single time. Because otherwise, obviously, you know, you're shooting at 500 yards, you dial to over many mils, and you may actually be shooting a little high or low if it's not tracking perfectly. So first, we'll do the box test. I'll show you how this happens. So come look over here. When I put the scope in the device, you'll see there's just a green light shining through, and then there's a reticle in the device. That's an extremely, extremely precise reticle. And then on this one, we're just gonna do a box test. So we're gonna go up, right, down, left, and make sure we're returning exactly to the center. We've run this test, and everything past that. Now what that means is the gearing in the turret can do the same thing every time. What it doesn't mean is that when I dial to 2 mils, it's truly moving me 2 mils. And that is where we had 2 scopes fail out. So that is the Hawk and the Vector Optics Continental. These ones were the only scopes that we were able to observe an error in. The error wasn't giant, but it was meaningful. This is what the test actually looks like. This is the Element Optics Titan, and it performs perfectly. You'll see the 2 reticles are lined up as best as we can, but we're kind of between clicks here. The scope's reticle is just barely above the lab equipment's reticle. We go down to 8 mils, and we see we end up perfect, just exactly that amount above between 2 clicks. This, however, is the Hawk scope. And you can see when we get down to the 8 mils that we've dialed on the scope, it's actually a tiny bit past that. And the same thing on the Vector Optics, it also went a little bit too far. So both the Vector Optics and the Hawk did display some tracking error in this test. So what does that mean? That means if you're shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor out to 650 yards, you'd see an error of about 5.5 inches. So it's meaningful, but it's, you know, it's gonna be fine if you're shooting shorter distances. So we have 2 scopes now beat out, and we've got to fight the rest of the gladiators. I think it's time for a good old-fashioned drop test. Oh boy, I hate this part of the test. It's time for the drop test. We're gonna drop it on the top turret and on the front objective bell for each scope. It's not completely equal because some of the scopes weigh more than others, but we got to put everything through the gauntlet here to see what we get. Next up, the primary arms. Primary arms did pretty well. We got a little bit of a ding in that bell, but the glass is all fine. The turrets work perfectly. I'm gonna call that a pass. Turret works perfectly. Glass looks great. Huskama passes. Right on is unscathed. Ooh, that didn't sound good. Zero Tech looks perfect, so overall, the only damage we saw was a slight ding in the bell. The Ride-On developed an issue. It could have been from this drop test, but I'm actually not sure when it started. But I can't show you on the video because YouTube won't let you see me spinning a turret. It's demonetized our videos before from that. But when you spin the top turret, the little mark that shows you what you're dialed to goes with you. And it sounds like it's 2 clicks for every one. I contacted Ride-On like I've contacted many of the manufacturers here, and they said this actually is not the current version of the scope. They have an updated version. And so I do want to put that caveat on the review of the Ride-On. I'm anxious to see the updated version because overall this performed really well. It was tracking perfectly, water test, everything. It did really well, but this particular copy developed that issue. Fortunately, they have a good warranty, so it's got to be knocked out of this test for that issue, but I'm anxious to see what Ride-On has coming up. This test is called the deer distance. This is for you guys who are hunting out of tree stands and stuff. You don't want to be too magnified that you can't see the deer if it pops up close, right? So as part of our standard hazing package for new employees, we're gonna set up our deer here. We want to know how far do you have to be in before you can't see. You'll just see fur through the scope. So we'll see how far on each one he can go back, and we'll get the rangefinder. Now obviously this is a 2-power scope on the lowest end. Some of the others are 4-power on the lowest end. So this isn't so much a apples to apples fairness test. It's just practical if you're picking a scope for deer hunting, which one would work in that kind of scenario. Just so you'll have the information. I don't think we can really cut one out for this. You're doing great.
Thanks.
Huskama gets a score of 11.7 yards. 16 yards. Write all these numbers down. Wings out.
This wasn't in my job description.
Yeah, just go back further, dear.
Am I supposed to like prance or?
Yeah, that's great. We're gonna have to redo all the other scopes. I didn't know that was one of the options. You're doing great. So no surprise, Huskama 2-power did fine, but the surprising thing was, like, if you look at the Hawk and the primary arms, they're both 4-power scopes at the low end, and there's a 5-yard difference between the field of view there. However, I would say that, 25 yards with the worst in this test for the width, you can still see a full deer at 25 yards. And so honestly, I don't think any of these I would cut out for being too magnified for hunting even at close range. I'll do the running around for this one. You can sit down on this one, dear. You're relieved of duty. Now we're doing the optical quality test. So we have a page out there about 35 yards away. It's actually the Declaration of Independence. We set everything to consistent magnification levels, and we're just seeing how easy it is to read the text on that page. I've always kind of discounted sharpness in scope testing because I think, like, I'm not taking a picture of it through my scope. I just need to see where on the deer I'm aiming and shoot. But I had an experience a couple weeks ago that really changed my mind on this, because I had a doe tag, and in this group of does, I could have easily made a huge mistake at distance at 400, 500 yards, whatever it was. I couldn't tell that one of them had tiny little antlers in there, and somebody on the spotter said, "Whoa, be careful, one's a buck." And in the scope, it just wasn't quite sharp enough to see that. So I'm really looking through these carefully now to see if any of them give us an edge on optical quality. And unfortunately, I just don't think in sharpness and chromatic aberration and sunlight getting in when we're looking toward the sun, I just don't see any real differences. Except there are 2 scopes that if I had a nitpick with, it would be the Blackhound and the Huskama, that both of these just have a thicker black ring around the image. The image just doesn't feel like it comes quite to the edge of your view. The time that I could see that being relevant is when you're looking through your scope, and then where am I aiming, and then you're trying to get in on the scope to get aimed on there when you're zoomed in. And for that, it is nice to have that image come a little bit closer. The Blackhound, I'm probably gonna cut it out, even though it's a heck of a scope and it really is performing well. But again, we've got a nitpick. The Huskama, it's marginal, but I think it's probably okay. I kind of feel bad about cutting anybody out for something such a nitpick as that. But again, we're looking for the perfect option here, and so we're being tough in each test. Over the last 2 weeks, we've looked at a lot of other categories. We did a low light test and found them all to perform very comparably. They all did a great job. Couldn't declare a winner there. We looked at the weight, the total elevation adjustment, where every scope is made, and a lot more. So you can keep looking at that, but we want to get into a couple nitpicks on these scopes that maybe kick them out, and some X factors that have cool technology that brings some of these up. One that we got to talk about first is this scope from Zerotech. Now, they have a first focal plane version of the trace, but it's over our category here. This is a second focal plane optic. It's a really exceptional scope, and so if that's what you're looking for, it's great. But where all of the others are first focal plane, I think we may stick to that as more of our category. Just a quick explanation for those of you who aren't familiar. On first focal plane scopes, as you zoom in, the reticle gets bigger at the same time as the image, and on a second focal plane, it does not. This makes a really big difference if you're shooting long range, because if you're trying to hold wind, the reticle won't be able to measure the correct amount if it isn't growing as you increase the magnification. On a second focal plane scope, the reticle is only correctly measuring when you're at an exact magnification distance. The strong industry trend here is toward first focal plane scopes. It's what most people are picking, but a second focal plane scope is the preference of some. Now, some things bring scopes up. The Burris has amazing technology that we haven't even talked about yet. This scope has a heads-up display inside the scope. So instead of when you're dialing it, just showing you 1, 2, 3 MOA, instead it's saying you're dialed to 247 yards. So you don't need your ballistic calculator on an app or anything. You just range find 500 yards, bloop, until you dial till you see 500 yards in there and you're ready to shoot. That's a total game changer. That could save you that garage sale scenario when you got a buck in there and you're trying to, what do I do? I'm trying to get a shot, Johnny. That is awesome. And so it had a tiny bit of water intrusion, but what an innovation and an incredible scope. I definitely wouldn't say you shouldn't get it. Wow, that was a lot of negatives in one. And now, for the riveting conclusion, after a couple weeks of work, there are 4 scopes that have risen to the top of this pile in all of these tests. 2 first focal plane scopes, the Element Optics Titan, and the Primary Arms GLX. 2 second focal plane scopes, they both did really well in the test as well. Now, I can tell you that. I can show you all the specs and the results of all of these specific tests. What YouTube doesn't allow you to hear is any kind of brand recommendation, the best for hunting, best for the long range shooter, target, that kind of stuff. And so for that, I made a simple page on the website. Go to backfire.tv/1000. That's backfire.tv/1000. Just type that in your browser. It'll take you right there, and I have a clear results there of what exactly I would pick after spending time on these. But there's really not a bad scope in this test. I want to give a shout out to all of the companies that chose to participate, sending scopes out and daring to put your product up next to others and being put through some brutal tests. I will say that some scopes and companies are conspicuously missing from this. I invited everybody to participate, and some of them didn't want to put their scope up next to others. Understandable, but that's why some are conspicuously missing, and others that, we tried to stay in that 3 to 18 first focal plane range, but, a couple second focal plane options and some that were close to that said, no, we've got to show this too. And so shout out to all the companies that chose to participate, and to the Backfire team, my wife, Emily, Peyton, who was our dear here, helped with the testing, and also Ren for editing this. This was a huge undertaking, so hope you guys appreciate it. Thanks for checking out backfire.tv/1000 and this video. We'll see you in the next Backfire film.